Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to visit the virtual exhibit hall. Not to worry if you're just joining us, it will be open throughout the day, and I highly encourage you to check it out. Um, Now, let's move on to our next session Trust Falls, Zero Trust in the Dawn of Remote Work. We have an all star panel to talk about use cases for implementing zero trust and how zero trust requires agencies to think differently about security, risk, and governance. One quick housekeeping item I want to remind everybody that if you're participating at home and watching, we have an interactive game going on throughout the day. It's a total of 10 questions that'll pop up throughout the summit on the main stage sessions, the demo booths. There might be one that pops up during this. A little hint, just stay tuned, follow along with the agenda and program, and you really can't miss it. And we'll be selecting winners for individuals that answer questions correctly. And then at the end, we'll choose 5 from a random draw to win a $15 DoorDash, which as much as I've ordered DoorDash over the last couple months, that would certainly come in handy. So please participate and follow along with us. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for the next session. We have Frank Kaniski, the CTO in the Office of the Secretary of the Air Force, Jamie Noble, Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Justice Office of Justice Programs, Raphael Marty, the Vice President of Research and Intelligence at ForcePoint's X Lab. And then joining us back is Eric Trexler, the Vice President of Sales for Global Government and Critical Infrastructure at ForcePoint. And with that, Eric, I'll
Thanks,
hand it
James.
over
I appreciate
to
it.
you.
How great was P.W. Singer a few minutes ago? Wasn't he great? Okay, so Jamie, Frank, and Rafi, welcome. I appreciate it. Zero trust, huge topic of interest right now in the federal government. 44 agencies are reported to have been dedicating time and funding and efforts to it. I want to get started. It's a security concept anchored in the principle of that organizations need to proactively control all interactions between people, data, and their information systems to reduce security risks to an acceptable level. You know, if I could quote the great Bruce Schneier, cryptologist, cybersecurity, we're getting better, but we're getting worse faster. Today we're going to talk about, is zero trust the answer? Before I do that, though, we had a major trust requiring event that happened with the COVID-19 in the spring here. Our agencies, our people had to work from home. People couldn't access their offices anymore. So 3 months ago, we get hit. America Shores changed the way that government and commercial industry work, forcing us to work from home. CIOs became chief resiliency officers overnight. Most people hadn't prepared for this, and if they did, they certainly hadn't budgeted or funded for the extent of the event. Jamie, I'll start with you. How's your world changed?
Our world's changed, but I have to say it probably hasn't changed as much as we would have thought. And looking back, we were really well positioned at OJP for exactly this scenario, believe it or not. So
That's amazing.
About 2 years ago, our CIO started looking into how we were going to refresh our desktop infrastructure for the workforce at OJP. And we really started looking at what ways does our workforce really work? How do they work? What is their day-to-day look like? And are they in the office for the majority of time? Are they traveling, visiting different grantees? So at the Office of Justice Programs, I'll just take a minute to explain our mission very, very quickly and succinctly. We are a grant-making organization where we give federal funds out to different entities with the concept of, reforming and bettering and furthering justice, criminal justice in the United States. And so the majority of our workforce are grant managers who go out and make sure that, these grants are managing the federal funding that they get in an appropriate way. So they're visiting all over the country and gaining information and speaking with people. So when we really looked at what our workforce was doing and how they were working, we wanted to make sure that they had a seamless user experience, whether or not they were in the office or they were out of the office. And so we, just at the end of this past February, so perfect timing, we refreshed all of our laptops to essentially Windows kiosk or dumb terminals, where we're launching our users directly into a virtual desktop infrastructure. So if they're in the office, they have one experience, and if they're out of the office, they have that very same experience. And so transitioning from our workforce being in the office and out of the office at any given time, we have a big mix. Now we're all at home, but it's exactly as we've always been working over the past couple of months.
You are not the typical enterprise organization, let me tell you. So you, I think in preparation, we were saying you have 100% of the workforce pretty much working from home at this point.
We do, yes.
And fully functional.
Fully functional. We have a handful of IT folks that if there's anything that happens with somebody's GFE, we're able to, or their iPhone, which I dropped mine the other day. So I had to have somebody, go into the office and FedEx me one so I could get it the very next day and, make sure that I didn't miss a beat when it came to working.
I'm going to take good luck and some preparation here. That's awesome. Frank, let's switch to the Air Force. How did the Air Force do? I mean, you have a global workforce, over 1 million employees, agents, contractors. How do you handle something like that on a dime?
It was difficult, to say the least. I mean, we had VPNs established already, and we had, VDI established in some places, but it was overwhelming for what we actually had to do. I mean, when everybody had to evacuate the bases, it got to the point where, it got to be, we had to establish more VPNs. We had conference lines that had to be enlarged because all of a sudden we had a draw of, how fast people can actually communicate with each other. And then at the same time, we had an issue with how many laptops we actually had in the inventory, because some of the people have laptops at the bases, but it's not norm in the bases to actually work at home unless it's necessary. I mean, a lot of them are on base anyways, and it's pretty close, or they're the adjoining cities. But still, it's a question of, how can you work in this way? And we got into a problem of we had to buy more laptops, we had to buy more capabilities across the entire spectrum, and then it affected, the office workforce. I mean, you can't repair planes virtually, so you have a mission going at the same time, and we have to have social distancing and everything else at the same time. And then you have the office work staff who is trying to support that. For instance, logistics has to support, the maintenance guys who have logistics are mainly office. So we have a virtual environment for, logistics management, but then you have the parts actually showing up at the base. And so you have to have people actually there. So we have a mix right now of how, so, who can show up and who cannot show up. And when they show up, you have to have a reservation system that basically says, when you show up now. And we have to establish collaboration tool sets across the board. And DoD did that with a Teams system, basically, across all of DoD, and we are actually using that. We have our own team system too, but it's a IL5 level system, and you have to have a VPN to get into it and everything else. And so they're mixed now out there of how we want to handle this. And as we look forward, the question is what kind of mix are we really going to have going in the future? It won't be all virtual. It has to be some physical. For instance, some of the secret meetings that we have and everything else, we have to go into the office to actually get to the terminals and everything else, even though we're looking now of having a mobile Cipro terminal that we can actually take home, or people can actually work at home with it. However, that's the future state. We're trying to get now to a point where we're saying, how much virtualization are we going to have? And a lot of it depends upon what you're actually doing. I mean, some of us talk about, we're going to rotate in once a week to do anything that's classified and have meetings, and other than that, we can actually do virtually at home. I mean, I particularly have a lot of contractor meetings in person. Well, that's kind of gone away. Now it's very collaboration tools that we're actually doing this with, which is fine. We're getting used to that now. So it's a way of going forward, and since there is no vaccine yet, I think you're going to see a mixed environment for several months until the beginning of the year, when potentially we'll have a vaccine, and then it'll get back to some degree of normalcy, or older.
Right, but we need to plan for this in the future also.
Oh yes, because we are looking right now to see what should be the virtualized workforce. What can be this? do it. And, it's a question of space too. I mean, I'm from the Pentagon, and it's pretty crowded in the Pentagon. And so everybody's like, okay, well, if we can eliminate half the people, well, we got a lot more space. But, you have to have space for, social distancing anyways. So you run into a, two-edged sword here that you want to have physical meetings, but you can't do it. And a lot of the meetings we have right now are all virtual. I mean, because we can't, our meetings that are, 20, 30 people in a conference room aren't going to happen anymore, at least for a while. So everything we have is virtual. Yesterday, we had like 45 people on. Of course, that was across the country and in Europe. So you get into a mode now where you have to start thinking about how do you actually can do this, where you can have a limited set sitting in a conference room, maybe 5, 10 people, but everybody else, the other 60 is sitting outside in the virtual environment. So we're planning for it now. And that's a lot of the planning efforts is figuring out exactly that and how we're going to actually manage that capability.
And I know you have over 700,000 people remote at this point working from home or wherever they may be. That's quite impressive.
Some are remote. I think it's about 400 and 500 really, but I think some are back. Some have to be back in the basement no matter how you figured this out. But yeah, we have a lot. It's an awful lot.
So let's switch to zero trust, the technology concept, I guess, that's going to help us as we figure out this new normal. One of the greatest challenges that we hear from CIOs and CISOs is when it comes to achieving a zero trust operating environment, the question is, how do you undertake such a massive endeavor? Where do you begin? So Jamie, I'm going to come back to you quickly. Where should agencies start when considering zero trust, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that agencies really have to take a hard look at how their workforce is operating in the day-to-day. So I kind of talked about that a little bit in the beginning is, when you have an opportunity to either refresh your desktop infrastructure or are looking for the ways that your workforces are changing, or even in this situation, reacting to a global event, you have to take a look at how your workforce is going to be operating, in the current situation, but then going forward and anticipating what their needs are going to be in each of those scenarios so that you can ensure that you're presenting a user experience that meets their needs, as well as is secure and robust enough to handle all of the loads and everything like that.
So where are you starting?
So we're starting, as I mentioned, we had an opportunity to refresh all of our laptops for our workforce. And we are starting with VDI in looking for how our workforce could, first of all, work from anywhere, anytime, on any device, and enabling their ability to work in any of those use cases. So I think that's really where agencies need to look is how is your workforce working? And it may have changed, and it even has changed for us in that, where our workforce was going out to different sites, they're not doing that anymore with, social distancing and everybody having those stay-at-home orders that are lifting slowly. But I think that what we're seeing is that there are spikes in cases, and I think that the government is taking a very conservative approach into sending the workforce back out there if it's not necessary. And so what we want to do is really be able to meet their needs, which I don't want to present that our situation was all sunshine and rainbows. We had to tweak a lot of our tools that we offer our workforce. So it's not just about the infrastructure, but it's about what collaboration tools you're offering your workforce in order to perform their duties, what platforms you're enabling them to participate in terms of working collaboratively with external stakeholders. So for example, there was a nice little firewall blocking my access to share my video at the beginning of this. So we're looking at all of those and we're considering those carefully. It does take a little bit of advanced planning, but I think that that's what you really need to look at is how is your workforce, not only where are they going to be physically located, but how are they going to be working and with whom are they going to be collaborating?
Okay. And Frank, we spoke about the Air Force has a lot of pilots looking at how do your users connect directly to Office 365, so they don't have to necessarily go through VPN or home run back to the Air Force data centers. How's that going?
We have a pilot going with that right now to actually see how effective it would actually be to do this. And it's a pilot that we're trying to do because obviously everybody started working at home. And then again, we have to connect into the real email system, which is the level 5 secure email system. So it's a way, how are we actually going to do this now? And, the pilot's there. It's a question of, we can always connect back in through the system and VPN in and go through, but it's a delay factor of how much trouble you have to do to get that. And of course, it's slow as can be because of all the connections that you have to do and back and forth. And so we're trying to figure this out. I mean, we've been looking at, zero trust for a while now, basically to guard the data. And I think you have a choice here. I mean, you can either look at what data is most important that I have to have a zero trust environment going to, or, and look at what the user community is actually trying to get at. So I think it's a combo of, it's forced us to look at it differently. We've always had a zero trust function, I guess, or an idea that we want to always be connected to data that's secure in a certain way. And we try not to have, man-in-the-middle network activity associated with it. But again, it's a question of, looking at both at the same time. What is your crown jewels that you want to securely guard? And then how is the user actually going to get to those crown jewels?
I think that's actually very similar, Frank, what you're saying in terms of what we're doing on the research side and the Forcepoint product side, right? We're really focused on, like, where is the data? What's the data? Who interacts with the data, right? Understanding these two entities really, like, how do they come together? And as you were saying, right, figuring out where is the critical data that you actually have to protect. And it's a lot about visibility. It's a lot about visibility into the data and the assets, right? Where are the critical assets that you really need to protect? And I think it's a really great starting point also for zero trust, like starting at the critical assets and making sure that the critical data is being protected first, and then you sort of expand from there.
What we call high value assets in the government or civilian world, they're absolutely targeting that, Rafi. So Rafi, I'm glad you spoke up. I wanted to get you engaged in the conversation here. Corporate customers, our commercial clients across the globe, they have the exact same challenges that Jamie and Frank have had, and the entire U.S. government, every government. COVID hit the world pretty much around the same time. Most weren't prepared. What are you seeing across the world?
Oh boy, it's been very interesting. We've definitely seen the bad guys. Some very interesting developments. They're active. They're more active than before. I read an article yesterday that some of the forums on the dark web, they're recruiting more people to help them go through all the requests they're getting right now, because they're getting inundated by people trying to do bad things and buying credit cards and identities and all kinds of things. So the bad guys are doing pretty well right now. They were also super quick in adapting to the new norm, right? People working from home, everybody interested in news about COVID, like what's happening in my state here, in my county. So that we've seen a huge uptick in phishing sites, in phishing emails that are showing or are trying to lure you into information about COVID, about vaccines, about prevention, masks, buying masks, all kinds of fake sites. Tons of activity around that. The other thing that we saw, because everybody's working from home now, is the hackers have not stopped. They jumped right onto that bandwagon. We've seen a number of attacks on home infrastructure, right? Home routers. We just saw another flaw coming out where a lot of infrastructure is vulnerable again, where they found another hole back in. And we're finding that when we're talking to our customers, there's a couple of things that kind of struck me as very interesting of what they're concerned with. And the number one sort of concern I hear from our customers is they're worried about people printing data locally, because they can't control anymore where that printout comes out. You have a visitor over at the house. Hopefully you don't right now. You're still staying home and you're staying by yourself. But you have these things lying around, like people exfiltrating data that way, because now you're not that controlled anymore. In an office environment, you can control what gets on the printer. You have visibility into that. But at home, a lot of our customers are very, very worried about what's being printed out and being potentially exfiltrated that way.
So zero trust, part of the design concepts are really constantly revalidating whether you should have access to something. Things like microsegmentation, really giving you just access to what you need or visibility into what you need. the IDAM, identity and access management side of the house, making sure you are really you and you have access to that information. Those should theoretically help when you're at home, preventing people from getting access to something they shouldn't have so that they can't print it out.
Yeah, but
Agree?
what happens, a lot of what happens is that you're looking at a password and maybe a second factor in the form of a token or a text message, or maybe something like Okta or Duo or something, where you get a second factor that you have to approve. The problem is, yes, that's much more secure than just a password. It can't just be, you can't just steal the password anymore. But a lot of these systems have been shown to be broken as well, right? Facial recognition has been hacked. And so what you really have to start doing is going one step further into sort of a behavioral world. What we're working on a lot is understanding what's the digital footprint of a person, and what is normal for, say, Eric or Rafi to move around in applications on the network, and then find deviations from there. So literally assessing the behavior of your devices and your users, and then finding the deviations from there, and putting that into a risk-based sort of context, rather than saying, oh, I saw you doing this, that, we're going to block you. That's not going to fly, because there's going to be too many false positives and things where it's like, no, but that was still me, right? I just did this weird thing. But we put this into this risk context, and in a higher risk, you can then adaptively change what you do. You don't have to just lock someone out forever. You can do a step-up authentication and ask him for something else that is not the regular password or the facial recognition or something. So getting into this continuous and risk-based assessment, basically.
Okay, so Jamie and Frank, back to you. The perimeter has, let's say, changed. Some people would say it's evolved. Some people would say it disappeared. The perimeter has absolutely changed, though, and our assumptions of trust and how we monitor our people and how we access data, totally different than they were 6 months ago as we move to the cloud. How does the zero trust model change, or how does zero trust change the model is maybe the better question. How should we do things different?
Okay, I'll start.
Go for it.
Yeah, I think, the problem we've had is that we've always had a network-based defense capability. I mean, we always said we're going to monitor the network, we're going to do everything else in the network. And that was the fortress mentality that we had. And we had multiple layers of the fortress, And now we're realizing that the fortress is penetrable. And that's always been the issue is. And so, right, we're not in the fortress anymore. The fortress walls have moved significantly. So as we progress down that point, that viewpoint, all of a sudden you say, hey, I really are, out there in the wild. And so, if I'm on my personal computer, as opposed to my government computer, what can I get access to that I have to do for my daily work? And so I think you're talking now about a different viewpoint of life. Again, we're going back to the data again. And the zero trust is supposed to, or the software-defined perimeter is supposed to tell us a secure way of getting to that data. At least that's the network connectivity piece that we're secure of. But then we have to do the ICANN piece, which is the authentication authorization piece at the end anyways. And the monitoring has to be there, no matter what you look at. You're not going to monitor the network so much, but you're going to monitor the both ends of the network now. At your laptop and at the application side, you're going to be looking at what is happening. And somehow you have to consolidate all that together, because you're not going to be able to penetrate the network theoretically now if I'm using software-defined perimeter. If you can, then it's a vulnerability, and therefore you shouldn't be using it. So you're going back again. But I think we're avoiding out now looking at the network traffic per se, except at both ends, and figuring out how can we combine that together into a risk-based analysis to say this is a problem. And we are concerned about, false positives. That's always been our concern, is that, especially in my office, when I get requests, from Congress to say, hey, go investigate this. My AOs go like everywhere to get some data, which looks very peculiar and suspicious at times, because you're trying to answer questions that you never knew were going to come. But then again, we have to look at that as this is the job of this person a lot of times to actually do things. And so, we always want to put things in terms of the context of what the person is actually doing in their job role as opposed to anything else.
So looking at behavior and intent.
Yes.
In many ways. Talk to us, Jamie.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, I mentioned that we had a highly mobile workforce. prior to this COVID-19 situation. And even though our workforce is not within our network and we're not at headquarters, we're at home, we're not mobile, we're not dispersed. So the behavior, as you can imagine, has changed significantly. And with, kids being home and, spouses having to share office space and share Wi-Fi connections and, share responsibility for, caring for either like elderly parents or making sure that their kids are, hooked up to whatever they're doing with school remotely. It's actually really forced us all to work more flexibly. And that means allowing people to work later into the evening hours. So we may see, right now we're in the midst of a modernization project for our legacy grants management system. And we have a deadline that we have to meet on October 1 in order to take advantage of a connection to our financial management systems. So, we can't miss that deadline. And we had to make sure that our productivity for our application developers was on pace and even ahead of pace in some situations, just considering all of the changes that were happening. So what we did was we asked people how they wanted to modify their work situation. So, it's not even just working remotely, it's working at all hours and all different hours, and considering the flexibility that people are going to need to balance their daily lives, just to make sure that we keep that productivity up. So looking at changes in behavior for people where it may have been very unusual before for developers to log on and be doing things at 11:30 at night, all the way up until say 2 o'clock in the morning, or starting at, 4 a.m. When, maybe in the previous world, they would have been awake, but working out or reading up on something. They're working now. And so we have to look at those and take into consideration that data. And we're leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning wherever possible, but we're having to make tweaks along the way. But it's been exciting, and it's been really powerful to see how we've been able to adapt to this situation and keep our productivity going.
Yeah, I'm looking at a question in the chat box from Ray Santana. Trust comes from the top of our governmental process and trickles downward. Workers working from home can enhance zero trust among all workers performing their duties, since there is no one truly overseeing their work. But he talks about workers are more lazy, they're more fatigued due to isolation and not working among others in their field. How does zero trust work if no one is in the capacity to truly monitor those working from their normal environment? So you're right, the behaviors change, the patterns change.
It definitely has.
So how do you handle that? You just accept it, or do you create new models?
Yeah, you have to create new models. And I think it seemed like the question from the audience member was related to people. So there's people, there's process, and technology, right? We can do what we can from a technological standpoint to enforce certain policies surrounding the behavior, but you really have to look at what the people are doing, and you have to put people first, right? And I mentioned, being flexible in working hours, and you could use metrics though to take a look at what people are doing. So instead of monitoring or micromanaging people and what they're doing, and hey, are you logged on now? Are you answering this email? There are different ways to measure productivity. And so I think that as managers in the government, and the question from the audience member alluded to leadership. It's really looking at things from a different lens, and you really have to shift your leadership. Maybe not shift your leadership, but certainly shift your managerial mindset.
Okay, so Rafi, time to update the models. Go ahead, Frank.
What we've done for us is we've gone to various collaboration platforms. In fact, I was at a technical meeting yesterday that they were going through slides, and one guy says, well, stop, I want to grab the slide and add some stuff to it, And so you get into a collaboration viewpoint that people are starting to get the idea that I don't have to be in the same room with you. I can do things out there and have this discussion now. And I think that's what's necessary, because we do a lot of collaboration. I mean, you have to collaborate with your staff all the time. I mean, I have a daily sync meeting every morning just because I want to make sure everybody's okay, and therefore we all know what we're going to do throughout the day. And then sometimes, we go in the middle of the day and we talk to each other. So I think, the behavioral side is very important, and it's a way you have to look at how you're going to manage the people now that you're not seeing them every day, but you still have to talk to them. And I think, they appreciate when you actually talk to them and say, hey, how are you feeling? and how's this work coming, and tell me, what you need. And that works well. And it's been working well. And the people had to get used to collaboration platforms. That was something unique, and they weren't familiar with it. And we still have the people who haven't shaved in 3 months, but they're starting to come out and say, hey, heck, I don't really care, which is good because now they're collaborating.
Rafi, how are you evolving the models in X Labs to account for work from home and the normal we have now?
That's a great question. It's, we for a long time, instead of building this model of a person of here is how Rafi works and how he uses his resources all day long, at 9 o'clock he gets up and then this and that. If you try to, in the normal, when normalcy is here and without a pandemic, my workday always looks different. I'm on the road a lot. I come in from different networks. I use applications very differently. So it's really hard to build a model even to start there. And now today, with all these other changes, what we're really focusing on is what are the things to stay static? And where we have a lot of success is when you look at the interaction of the user and the data again, right? Really, okay, how does someone interact with their critical information, with their business files, with wherever you are collecting your critical information? And that point is not going to change that much, right? I still have my day job to do. I will go into the financial system with very similar things that I do, right? I go and approve POs. I hardly ever create them. There's certain things I do that we can build really good profiles on. And so we're trying to find those things that are stable even in a changing world.
Almost to what Jamie was saying, you have certain work you need to get done and you can look at the work product being done. You're saying we can model that also so we can automate it so it's not just on the manager.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so I have a few more questions we'll try to get through. I really appreciate the conversation. This one, though, is really, I love this question because it gets to culture, it gets to people. Since the first virus came out in 1987, we started forming our cultural norms on our network security teams, our cybersecurity teams, and we built them up. We keep getting further and further behind the adversary. How does Zero Trust, 30 years of cybersecurity history, 33, I guess, how does Zero Trust really change the model for us, in your opinions? Jamie, I'll throw that to you first.
I think that it really puts the onus on the entity to really identify who is accessing this. And so it's not so much, where you're coming from and that you're like in this trusted enclave on our network, in our building, we can see you. It's almost putting our users out as if they were coming at us as an adversary traditionally would have. And so it's putting the onus back on us as the organization to make sure, who is this person? Do we know who they are? Should they have access to this data? And then looking at that and making sure that the behavior, as Rafi mentioned, models what they're doing. So I think that's how it's changed, and I think it's a good way of looking at things.
And are your cybersecurity teams adopting? Are they saying this makes sense to me, even though I've done it for maybe a decade plus, a different way?
I will say, going back to people, and they're always the variable in this. There have been
it's always about the people
that have not adapted to this new model and this new way of thinking things. They want to put on their tinfoil hat. And they want to, have everything in a neat, tidy box, but that's just not the way that the world works now. And I think that with the COVID-19, it's kind of forced them into, jolted them, if you will, into having to think like this. They don't have another choice. And so I think that they're coming along, which is a really nice thing to see, because they don't feel like an outcast anymore. It's saying, I don't agree with this, or we shouldn't do this, it's too risky. But then forcing them to do this and then looking at it and then, looking at it with their specific lens and offering their eyes on what we're seeing. And so I think, diversity of mindset is always very valuable. And I think in this situation, it's even more so.
Frank, when we look at the Air Force, how do we aim high here and not leave a ton of people behind on the way they've always done it?
That's a good question. Well, it's called change management. I think, and it's going to be it's somewhat difficult, but this has forced us to actually do some change management. I think that's good, and then happened much faster than anybody ever anticipated. Let's put it that way, because we were talking about doing zero trust. Now we're doing an experiment right now in a pilot. And that's been we've been talking about it for years. So, and now we're talking about ICAM as a centralized way of looking at who gets to what and comparing across the systems now. To do the behavioral model, because it's interesting that everybody was isolated before, and now we're talking about how can we merge the data together to figure out what's really going on. And so I think that's forced us to look at our authentication mechanism, especially when we talk about authentication from outside of the DoD environment. What am I going to use for authentication? We talked about multi-factors. We talked about all sorts of things as to how we want to progress outwards into more technologies as opposed to just using the CAT card. And I think that's going to help a lot for when we go out and look at the environment that we're currently going to be living in for at least a very long time.
Well, and we have a question from Ali, who actually has an airforce.mil address about personal devices and the warnings that noted. How do you use government access government systems and data from a personal device?
Okay, this is a question. Do I trust the employee or do I not? That's the question you're asking, and you have to say yes to a certain degree. But then again, I do have some monitoring capabilities that I have to put into effect to ensure that that's really happening. I mean, it's always a question. Do I trust any employee out there that says, I believe that you're not going to download any data onto your machine that's FOUO or whatever. And the answer is we have to a certain extent. But then again, we have to make sure that we measure that extent and understand capabilities and start monitoring capabilities that we have to ensure that we try not to actually put a capability out that would be used in such a way. So we try to put a prevention block in anyways. And so it's a real tough question, because that's always goes back to, do I trust the employee or not?
It is a very tough question. In fact, we have one more that says, should we say that our security status is at its most vulnerable? How can we maintain a sterile environment among our overall security? And I think zero trust at its fundamental roots assumes a non-sterile environment. We don't trust, right? We have to verify and continually validate and verify trust, because without trust, you have nothing, right? At Force Point, we call it continuous trust. We have to continuously trust you, Jamie, or you, Frank, and validate that it's you and you're doing the things you want. And if you're not, we're addressing that. So I don't love the name zero trust, but I understand the concept and what we're getting to. So Ray, to your question, I think we have to assume it's a dirty environment from default. That is zero trust in my mind. So go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that you do have to assume that whatever device, if you're going to allow BYOD, and we do at OJP at this particular moment, but we do require PIV authentication so that we can really make sure that the person who is authenticating is who they say they are. And the virtual desktop infrastructure that we've implemented automatically assumes that the machine that you're connecting from is infected with malware. And so, we do a series of things where, we really partition off that personally owned device from the virtual desktop infrastructure that the person is, once they authenticate, is launched into, and that's where they do all of their work. You're not allowed to download things to your device. You're not allowed to copy and paste from one window to, your desktop on your personally owned device. You're not allowed to print from those devices, and so on and so forth. So I think that, you're exactly right. You just have to automatically assume that everything else is infected.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that, because our BYOD is the same thing. We have a secure container that you're into. You have to have authentication. You have to have certs. You can't get out of that container. You can't move data. So we do put in blocks. That's what I meant by blocks. We do prevent things from occurring, because it's a question of trust, not, but we do put on the blocks necessary to actually control it.
Yeah, so we're at the end of our time, unfortunately. I really, really appreciate everybody's time with us today. Louis, I'll answer your question in my opinion really quickly. We may trust our employees, but zero trust assumes no trust. I think we talked a little bit about that. How do we include all three aspects, people, process, and techniques, into a trust, non-trust construct? There's a ton out there. IAC did a paper, NIST guidelines, I think it's 800-207, I think. There's a ton out there to help you. Drop us a note. We'll give you our thoughts. Once again, though, Frank, Jamie, Rafi, really appreciate your time. We're going to shut down the panel at this point. Everybody join us. We have Joe Montiel with George Camus coming up. Commercial Solutions for Classified with Joe from the FBI. There are going to be some great stories in that. So please pay attention to that next. Grab it. If you need to grab lunch or something, do that and listen to the replay. Frank, Jamie, and Rafi, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.